You descend the stone shaft alone. Air grows colder, not the kind of cold that touches skin, but the kind that brushes the inside of your bones. Your light flickers, catching the glint of gold ahead. The hallway narrows. Your fingers trail along carved walls, scenes of gods with animal heads, their eyes staring through time. The paint still clings to the stone, defying death itself. You pass through a doorway, then you see it. A chamber buried for over 3,000 years, untouched, and in the center a gilded sarcophagus, resting like a wound that never healed. You step closer, heart steady, breath held. Inside the coffin is a boy. He wears a golden mask. Perfect. Serene. But the moment you look closer, you see the lie. Surrounding him are not weapons, not scrolls, not royal insignia. They are walking sticks. Over 100 of them, some carved from ebony, some wrapped in linen, some no more than crude canes worn by constant use. They fill the corners. Piled, stacked, hidden under golden thrones and ritual tools. These aren't symbols of divine power. They're the instruments of a child who could barely stand. You lean in. The bones beneath the wrappings bulge unnaturally, his spine curved, his foot turned inward, eaten by disease, his rib cage compressed, and the mask stares back, possibly perfect. But this wasn't a god. This was a boy trapped in a body that never belonged to him, a body forged not by fate or illness, but by a decision made generations before he ever took a breath. His parents were brother and sister. So were his grandparents, his great-grandparents. This was no accident. This was a system. You step back. Your breath catches. This child was one in a long line of divine rulers, praised as living gods while dying in secret. Their bones tell the truth that temples tried to erase. Egypt's greatest families worshipped bloodline purity. That worship became a curse. But here's what they never told you in school. The pharaohs, the ones who built pyramids and ruled for millennia, were destroying themselves from the inside out. What if I told you this wasn't rare, that this boy wasn't unique, that for 3,000 years, Egypt's divine rulers were part of the most catastrophic genetic experiment in history? What if I told you this wasn't mythology, this was policy, this was tradition, this was their faith? And now, thousands of years later, science has finally uncovered what those priests refused to name. This story is not just about mummies and temples. It's about children born into gilded cages. It's about ideology that turns love into obligation and power into poison. Let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? Because we're about to travel through a history carved in stone and sealed in flesh, across dynasties, across generations, across centuries of silent agony. We begin not in war, but in a bedroom, where a god was told to marry his sister, where a child was born broken. It didn't start as evil. First pharaohs stood taller than the rest of the world, at least. That's how their scribes described them. Men of divine origin, born from sky and sun, destined to rule not by might, but by blood. Their veins, it was said, pulsed with the essence of gods. Their eyes held the judgment of Ra. To touch them was blasphemy. To marry them, only the divine could dare. And so the logic formed. If the pharaoh is a god who is worthy of his bed, his sister, his daughter, no outsider could contain the flame of divinity. No common womb could carry the sun. In time, that logic became law. Religion wove it into ritual. Priests blessed it, scribes recorded it, artists painted it, and tombs royal siblings joined hand, in hand halos of lotus and ankhs above their heads. It was called Nesebit, the dual king. Divine union. But behind the gold and incense, something darker took root. The bloodline shrank. The family tree stopped growing outward, turned in on itself, coiling like a snake eating its own tail. Names repeated across generations. Amenhotep, Thutmose, Emos. Every brother had a sister. Every sister a throne. Each union became tighter, purer, deadlier. No one saw it coming, or maybe they didn't chose not to look. Some of the earliest warnings come not from the tombs, but from the margins of medical papyri. A scroll discovered at Deir el-Bahri describes a prince born with a softened skull and trembling limbs. Another, housed in Turin, refers to a daughter of the king who perished after her third moon, born without cry or breath. But those were not tragedies. They were signs. Signs that the gods were near. The first generation The damage was subtle. Stutter, a curved finger, a limp that could be hidden with a ceremonial staff. The priests called these marks of the sacred. By the second generation, the deformities worsened. Dislocated hips, jaws that would not shut, eyes that fluttered uncontrollably. A prince who could not hold his head upright past sunset. Still, no one spoke. To question the system was to challenge the order of the universe. And so, the palace adjusted. Beds were fitted with restraints for seizures. Servants were trained to dress twisted limbs without wincing. Portraits were idealized. Priests refined their stories. The divine body is different, they whispered. It must carry burdens that mortals cannot bear. Some royal children were never named, buried in tombs with no inscriptions, no offerings, just linen and silence. One archaeologist in 1987 uncovered a series of infant coffins in a royal nursery near Thebes. The bodies were underdeveloped, the spines malformed. Several lacked full skull closures. The excavation report did not speculate cause, but the patterns were clear. Even the architecture began to shift. Palace steps were widened, thrones lowered. Rituals shortened to spare the pharaoh's strength. In one preserved relief, the ruler is shown being carried not in triumph, but necessity. But still, the ideology held. One pharaoh, according to an inscription in Luxor, married 4 of his half-sisters. Another, Amenhotep III, was said to have declared, "The blood of Ra must be preserved, even if the flesh must suffer." And suffer it did. An anonymous court physician whose broken tablet was found in the sand near Amarna wrote, "We drain the prince's abscess twice a day. The swelling returns by night. He cannot eat without aid. The priests say he is blessed. I have no prayers left." Not all suffered quietly. One princess, recorded only as daughter of the moon, refused her brother's hand. Her name is struck from all future records. Her chamber was sealed, her burial site unknown. This was the true empire of Egypt, not the temples or the tombs, but a closed chamber where decisions were made not for love, nor peace, nor prosperity, but for blood. Each birth became a risk, each union a roll of loaded dice. And no one stopped the game, because no one could. Because the system was sacred. Until one child was born so visibly, so painfully twisted, that even the priests could not call it divine without trembling. He would become the most controversial ruler in Egyptian history. His name was Amenhotep IV. But history would know him as Akhenaten. They say he was born in the palace of his father, Amenhotep III, during a year when the Nile flooded too early. A bad omen. His mother, Queen Tai, was powerful, sharp-eyed, cunning, descended from priests and favored by gods. She had married her half-brother to keep the bloodline pure. She bore him many children. But this one was different. From the moment Amenhotep IV entered the world, the midwives hesitated. His head too long, too narrow, the back of his skull curved unnaturally, almost stretched, his neck tilted. His mouth sagged open, tongue sluggish. His legs were bowed before he could stand. His hips protruded wide like a woman's, and his chest held a strange softness, neither male nor female. One servant, writing on astraca, found near Amarna, described the child without naming him. His bones grow like wax left in the sun, and yet he was the heir. Tutors were assigned. Priests brought scrolls of divine law. Physicians administered oils and salves. Nurses lifted his limp body into warm pools to strengthen his legs. But nothing worked. By 5, he could walk slowly. By 7, he could recite prayers, but only in private. By 10, he was hidden from sight. No official portraits were made of him as a child. No public festivals. No parades through the court. Instead, Amenhotep IV was raised in corridors shadowed by curtains, behind carved screens where he watched his older brothers and sisters smile for scribes.
How?
He learned early that he was different, and he learned to hate it. There are no records of the beatings, but they must have happened, not from cruelty, but from protocol. When a young prince failed to stand for a temple ritual, a soldier might push him upright with the blunt end of a spear. When his knees buckled during a recitation, A scribe might strike him lightly to correct his posture. Not punishment correction, not violence restoration, because the divine must not falter, and still he faltered. At 16, Amenhotep IV was crowned pharaoh. He trembled as he stood before the priests of Amen. Beneath layers of linen and gold, his bones felt like reeds. His ceremonial robes were pinned to hide the swelling of his chest, the curve of his spine. His attendants braced him before the crowd entered the hall. They praised his beauty, chanted his strength, but everyone saw the truth. He was a pharaoh who looked nothing like the gods painted on the temple walls. His hips were too wide, his belly too soft, his face too alien. The palace had spent his entire childhood pretending he was whole, and now the mask had cracked, so he created a new mask. Within a year, Amenhotep IV abolished the gods, declared Aten, the sun, Disk the only true deity. He banished Amen, dismantled the priesthood, closed centuries-old temples. He changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. But his most heretical act wasn't religious. It was artistic. He ordered a revolution in style. From that moment on, royal art would depict the pharaoh and his family as they truly were: misshapen, elongated, real. The statues that followed show a body unlike any before. Akhenaten's, face long, gaunt, with slanted eyes and full lips, his stomach round and sagging, his chest feminine, his limbs too long, skull grotesquely extended. And beside him, 6 daughters, each bearing the same traits. Tiny girls with curved backs and bulbous heads, their arms thin as reeds, their postures always leaning. Some are depicted kissing their father. Others lie sprawled across Nefertiti's lap, their bodies limp. One, in a private relief hidden behind a shrine wall, appears to be blindfolded, not in ceremony, but concealment. No one knows their names. 2 died in childhood. The others faded into silence. Akhenaten painted it all. He built a new capital, Akhetaten, the horizon of the sun, away from Thebes, away from the old gods, from judgment. It was a city of light and air, where no one would dare question the shape of his body or the fate of his children. But the sun cannot heal a broken genome. In the last years of his life, Akhenaten became reclusive. He stopped appearing in public. His legs swelled. He was often carried to his balcony, where he lay beneath linen veils watching the light shift across his city. The priests whispered. The court grew restless. And when he finally died, likely in his 30s, his body was so damaged that it could not be preserved. His name was erased. His god abandoned. His city left to crumble in the desert. But the blood he passed on did not vanish. His son still lived. And what Akhenaten had inherited in silence, his son would wear like a wound. He was born into shadows. No fanfare marked his arrival, no parade of priests or proclamations in stone. The palace was silent for the birth of a pharaoh. Some say even his birth was hurried, a desperate attempt to preserve the divine line as Akhenaten's health collapsed. Others say he was born already limping, with his left foot curled beneath him like a broken root. His name was Tutankhaten. He was the son of Akhenaten and his sister, though which sister is uncertain. Their blood was identical, their union inevitable. The royal physicians called him a blessing, a miracle. But in their private notes, now stored in Cairo's museum archives, a darker truth emerges. One note, smudged but legible, reads, "The child walks not, only dragged to motion. The spine leans. His breath is shallow in heat. At the time he was 5, the staff had built special ramps throughout the palace. By the time he was 7, he had already undergone 2 sacred cleansing rituals meant to banish evil spirits, evil that lived not in curses, but in chromosomes. At 9 years old, he became pharaoh, Tutankhamen, but in the royal court everyone knew the boy king would not live long. His body was a museum of inherited pain. He had a clubfoot so severe he could barely walk unaided. His spine was shaped, forcing him to hunch, and his sternum jutted forward unnaturally, making it hard to breathe under ceremonial robes. His teeth were misaligned. His skull bore the elongated shape passed down from Akhenaten, an unmistakable mark of the cursed bloodline. He was rarely seen standing in public. Instead, he was propped against altars, supported by servants just outside the frame of frescoes. Every image of him as a charioteer or hunter is a fiction, a carefully curated illusion, crafted by court artists who worked not with realism, but with reverence. Inside the palace, the truth was harder to disguise. He used walking sticks, over 100 of them. They littered his chambers, carved from ivory, ebony, and gold, each fitted for his changing height and worsening posture. These weren't ornamental, they were necessary, they were survival. The records from his physician, later discovered in his tomb, note recurring infections, necrosis in his left foot, a possible fracture in his thigh. They treated him with wine-soaked bandages, honey, and incense. Nothing worked. He grew weaker. And yet, the rituals continued. Tutankhamun was forced to perform the Hibsed Festivala, public renewal of strength meant to mimic the divine stamina of Horus himself. He could barely stand. The festival was shortened. The platform sloped. The footage was controlled. Those closest to him knew. The boy who limped was playing a god who could no longer walk. Even his marriage was theater. He was wed to Ankhesenamun. His half-sister also descended from Akhenaten's tainted line. She was barely 14 when they were married. In private murals, they are shown together, her hand brushing his, a symbol of harmony. But their children died. 2 tiny mummies were found buried with him, both girls. One was born at 7 months, the other full term. Both were severely deformed. Their skulls had not fully fused. Their limbs were twisted, were swaddled in linen and sealed in gold, then placed beside their father. No names, no titles, just silence. She disappears from the records soon after Tutankhamun's death. A letter, believed to be from her, was sent to a foreign king, begging for help, for a husband, for escape. He sent her a prince. The prince was murdered before reaching Egypt. She was likely forced into marriage with one of her father's old generals. Then she vanished. And Tutankhamun died at 19. The cause is still debated. Malaria, a fall, blood poisoning, bone necrosis, but all agree on this. He was not strong enough to fight it. His immune system was broken, his skeleton brittle, his organs malformed. He likely died in agony, able to walk, unable to breathe, fevered, delirious, surrounded by priests singing of his divinity as his body collapsed. They embalmed him too quickly. His body was burned by resin, his bones scorched, his burial rushed. There was no time to build him a proper tomb. The one he now lies in was meant for someone else. He was sealed in gold and darkness, and forgotten. Until 1922, Howard Carter opened the tomb, expecting treasure, and found evidence. Tutankhamun became famous not because he ruled wisely, or built monuments, or waged wars, but because his tomb survived. He was never meant to be remembered, but in death, he told the truth no one else dared. Every cane, every walking staff, every malformed rib, every miscarried daughter, they are not symbols of glory. They are symptoms of a dynasty that worshipped itself into extinction. It should have ended there. Tutankhamun's body, so frail it could barely stand, should have been the final proof. A divine child, born broken, buried with his unborn daughters, sealed inside a tomb with 100 walking sticks, each one a silent scream. But Egypt's lesson was not learned. 3 centuries later, the cycle would begin again. This time, not by native pharaohs, but by foreigners. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great marched into Egypt. He was welcomed not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The priests of Memphis called him divine. The people bowed. And when he died young, his generals divided the ancient world like spoils of war. One of them, Ptolemy I Sotar, took Egypt. He was not Egyptian. He was Macedonian, companion of Alexander, trained in war, not worship. But Ptolemy understood power. He knew that Egypt revered tradition above all else. And so he adopted the rituals, the symbols, the gods. He crowned himself pharaoh, and the people accepted him. But the temples whispered something else. The secret to divine rule wasn't in language or religion, it was in blood. So the Greeks imitated the pharaohs, not their victories, but their sickness. And this time, they did it with precision. The Ptolemaic dynasty institutionalized sibling marriage with ruthless consistency, brother to sister, over and over. Not occasionally, not when convenient. Always. It began with Ptolemy II, who married his full sister Arsinoe II and deified her during her lifetime. He minted coins with their faces side by side, divine twins. The public praised it. The priests nodded. It continued for nearly 300 years. By the fourth generation, the family tree no longer branched, it spiraled. Every ruler bore the same names: Ptolemy, Cleopatra, Bernice, Arsinoe. By the seventh generation, those names no longer referred to individuals. They were placeholders in a closed genetic loop. Cousins became husbands. Sisters became mothers and wives in the same breath. Uncles married nieces, who were also granddaughters. The records grow murky, as if even the scribes lost track of who begat whom. And inside the palaces of Alexandria, the consequences appeared. Infants who did not survive to naming, queens who disappeared after childbirth, Ptolemaic prince who bled from the eyes during rituals, another who could not stand unassisted before the army. But the dynasty concealed it well. They built towering libraries, sponsored mathematicians and poets. On the surface, the Ptolemies were golden, cultured, godlike, inside the palace. Madness festered. Ptolemy VIII was so hated by his subjects that they called him Fiskin, the bloated one. He married both his sisters, then murdered one of them. He killed his own son and sent the body to the mother as a wedding gift. This was divine royalty, and yet no one stopped it, because power, once it is justified by blood, will destroy anything to maintain the illusion of purity. Then came the final flower of the line, Cleopatra VII. She was brilliant, educated, political. She spoke 9 languages. She could quote Homer and debate Caesar. Her enemies called her seductive, manipulative, dangerous, but she was also a child of this bloodline. Coins minted in her lifetime depict a strong jaw, hooked nose, prominent forehead, traits that had echoed through generations of inbreeding. She likely suffered from mild deformities herself, minor compared to her ancestors, but still present. She knew her blood was poisoned, and that may be why she sought Roman blood. Her liaisons with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were not just political, they were genetic lifelines. Their children might have been salvation, a break in the chain. But Rome saw them as threats. After Cleopatra's defeat at the Battle of Actium, in the future, Augustus ordered the death of Caesarion, her son, with Julius Caesar. Her other children were taken to Rome, paraded in chains. They vanished into history, and so Cleopatra made her final choice: death. Legend says she used a cobra hidden in a basket of figs. Others claim poison slipped beneath her tongue. However she did it, her final act was not just political, it was merciful. She ended her life, and with it, ended the line. After nearly 300 years, the most intensive royal inbreeding program in history collapsed into silence. But the damage lived on. The Ptolemies had tried to mimic Egypt, and Egypt had consumed them. They came as conquerors. They left as victims of the very ideology they thought they could control. Now imagine being one of them. Not the conquerors. Not the gods carved in stone, but the children, the ones born into silence, into sickness, into golden rooms that reeked of incense, rot, and prayer. You are 4 years old. You've never seen the Nile. The sun burns your eyes, so they keep you indoors. Your body trembles when you try to stand. A nurse carries you to the window each morning so you can feel warmth, even if you cannot reach it yourself. No one tells you why. Your older brother stares at you across the breakfast table, his jaw swollen, his eyes always blinking. He cannot chew unless someone holds his mouth shut for him. You both wear amulets to ward off evil spirits. They say your pain is a blessing, but it doesn't feel that way. Sometimes your uncle visits dressed in golden feathers. He's a priest or a prince, or maybe both. He pats your head with trembling fingers and whispers, "You are the future." But when you cry at night from the pain in your legs, no one comes. Because gods don't weep. The palace is enormous, but you live in one corridor. You are not allowed in the halls where the soldiers train or the gardens where the children of servants play. Your playmates are your siblings, those who survived. Some are nearly identical to you, born of the same mother, the same father, the same line, You begin to notice something no one says aloud. Everyone you know looks wrong. Your sister's arms are too thin. Your cousin walks with a limp that worsens each year. One aunt never leaves her room after her 6th miscarriage. A brother dies at 10. They say he was called back to the gods, but the truth hangs in the air like a disease. When you ask your nurse why the bones in your wrists bend so icily, she says, because you are sacred. But sacred hurts. The royal physicians know the truth. They write it in coded script, hidden behind layers of ceremonial reports. Words like brittle and hypoplastic and non-viable, scribbled between prayers to Isis and Ra. But the priests demand rituals. Each child must walk, must dance, must lift offerings before the gods. So they strap splints to your legs. They wrap your feet in linen soaked in palm oil. On festival days, they paint your face and hoist you onto the platform. You are smiling in the fresco butt. Your bruises bloom beneath the silk. No one sees you fall after the ritual ends. The soldiers look away. The servants pretend not to notice. And deep down you begin to understand. Your body is not yours. It belongs to a story older than you, more powerful than you. A story about blood, about godhood, about control. The older you grow, the smaller your world becomes. By 12, you've buried 2 younger siblings. You weren't allowed to see the bodies, but you heard the whispers. One was born without a skull cap. The other never breathed. The priest said it was fate. You wonder if it was your blood. At 14, you are married to your sister. She trembles when she touches you. Not from fear, but from recognition. You are both damaged. You both know. And as the wedding drums echo through the stone halls as you are led to the chamber where the union must be completed, you feel not joy, not shame, but a strange, numbing inevitability. This is how it works. This is how it always worked. A golden cage, passed down generation after generation, filled with sick children forced to perform strength. This is how divine blood maintains itself, not through glory, but through silence. Silence preserved the illusion. For thousands of years, the Egyptian royals buried their deformities beneath gold, incense, and stone. But when the tombs were finally opened, not by priests, but by scientists, truth spilled out like sand. In 2010, a genetic study led by Dr. Zahi Havas and Dr. Karsten Pusch unraveled Egypt's most sacred myth. Using DNA extracted from 11 royal mummies, including Tutankhamun, his father Akhenaten, and his grandparents, they confirmed what bones had whispered for centuries. The pharaohs weren't cursed, they were inbred. Akhenaten was the son of a brother and sister, Akhenaten and the younger lady, his full sibling. Their genes matched too closely. Their union was not metaphorical. It was literal. And the price was carved into their child's skeleton. He carried recessive genes from both parents. The worst ones. The ones that, in a healthy population, would have stayed silent, masked by diversity. But the Egyptian royals weren't diverse. They were a closed loop. And Tutankhamun paid the price. CT scans revealed the damage in detail. Congenital scoliosis, clubfoot, a cleft palate, necrosis in the left foot, a malformed sternum that made breathing in desert heat a struggle. His immune system was so compromised that a mosquito bite malaria was likely what killed him. Not war, not poison, a single insect. His tomb tells the rest. 130 walking sticks, a hastily sealed sarcophagus, a mummified body burned by embalming oils, as if someone tried to hide the truth even after death. Tiny mummies of stillborn daughters beside him, one with a curved spine, another with an incomplete skull, a family line falling apart in real time. And it wasn't just him. Akhenaten's DNA showed genetic traits linked to Marfan syndrome, abnormally long limbs, fragile bones, possible heart defects. His statues had not lied. His strange figure was not symbolic. It was accurate. Historians once believed the art from Amarna was a stylistic experiment. Now we know it was documentation. The royal family really looked that way. And behind the art, the rituals, the songs, to Aten was science. Not the science they understood, but the science that was killing them. Modern genetics explains what ancient medicine could not. Sibling marriage increases the chance of homozygosity. When a child inherits 2 identical copies of a gene from both parents, if that gene is recessive and harmful, the result is often lethal. In a healthy, diverse population, those genes are diluted. But in royal Egypt, generation after generation, they were compounded. Each marriage tightened the noose. By the time of Cleopatra, the inbreeding had been practiced for nearly 3 millennia. While her physical condition is harder to confirm, her tomb has never been found. Coins from her era depict sharp facial angles and a prominent jaw, repeated traits, recycled features. The family tree had become a hall of mirrors. And so had the royal propaganda. Every defect was recast as a mark of divinity. Every deformity, a gift from the gods. But under modern light, the masks melt. The genetic disorders are clear, and they're consistent. Studies of other mummies, rulers, consorts, even stillborn infants reveal a trail of defects: spina bifida, limbs, hydrocephalus, missing ribs, fused joints. Rare diseases that today would raise red flags in any medical journal were normalized by ritual and religion. The truth is, ancient Egypt was conducting a human experiment. Unwittingly, unintentionally, but relentlessly. Over 3,000 years, they explored the limits of genetic isolation. And the results preserved in linen, resin, and bone are now part of our scientific record. What they called holiness, we now understand as recessive mutation. What they called the divine image, we now recognize as genetic collapse. But science didn't arrive in time to save them. It came only after the tombs were sealed, after the screams had stopped, after the lineage had ended. And yet, their suffering wasn't meaningless. Their DNA scraped from bones read in labs, cross-matched in genome sequences, became data, evidence, proof of what happens when tradition overrides biology. They never meant to teach us, but they did. They gave us a warning, written not in hieroglyphs, but in blood. History, like blood, flows in cycles. In Egypt, the land of endless sun and shifting sand, was no exception. Its greatness rose like the Nile floodwaters, unstoppable, glittering, filled with promise. But always, always, it receded into collapse. Not from enemies, not from drought, but from within. This is the cycle. Power rises. A dynasty hardens. Its bloodline is declared sacred. Purity becomes dogma. Incest becomes ritual. Then the consequences arrive slow at first. A prince born blind, a queen who can't bear children, a pharaoh who cannot walk without assistance. The bloodline twists, the empire fractures, collapse, then recovery. And the pattern begins again. The old kingdom gave us pyramids, and with them, the earliest hints of sibling marriage. The tomb inscriptions are vague, but clear enough. Royal titles passed through both mother and father. Half-sisters became queens. The divine blood remained contained. And then came the first intermediate period, a time of disarray. Central power fractured. Tombs were looted. Gods seemed distant. Egypt turned inward. Centuries later, the Middle Kingdom emerged like a sunrise. New rulers, stronger laws, foreign brides. Pharaohs married princesses from Nubia and the Levant. The bloodlines diversified. Political stability returned. Prosperity bloomed. The lesson seemed learned, but power forgets. The new kingdom, the era of empire, glory, and gold revived the old myth that gods must marry gods, that divine essence must remain pure. Amenhotep III married his sister, so did Akhenaten, so did his children. And the price, Tutankhamun, a dynasty collapsing in real time. A boy pharaoh whose DNA was a confession. After his death, the 18th dynasty crumbled. The throne passed to generals, then to distant cousins, then to strangers who wore crowns that didn't fit. Collapse, recovery. Then the cycle again. During the late period, Egypt opened once more. Foreign blood flowed into the court. Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians. Pharaohs married strategically, forging alliances instead of sealing incestuous loops. Stability returned for a while. The gods smiled, or so it seemed. And then Alexander. The conqueror arrived not just with armies, but with ambition. His successors, the Ptolemies, studied the past, admired the rituals, envied the longevity of Egyptian dynasties. So they copied the worst of it. They didn't just repeat Egypt's mistakes, they perfected them. Every Ptolemaic ruler married their sibling, not for tradition, not for faith, for control. They crafted the most intensive inbreeding program in recorded history, 300 years of biological recursion. Generation after generation of royal children born from shared blood, shared bones, shared defects. The royal court of Alexandria became a laboratory of inherited madness, and again collapse. By the time Cleopatra took the throne, the dynasty was running on fumes, political, psychological, genetic. She tried to escape the pattern, reached for Caesar, reached for Antony. But Rome didn't care about bloodlines. It cared about empire. Her children were killed, her throne stolen, her body lost to time. And the cycle ended, not with a war, but with a whisper. The whisper carried a warning. Across centuries, the pattern repeats itself. Not just in Egypt, but in empires everywhere. Power begets isolation. Isolation breeds arrogance. Arrogance poisons the blood metaphorically, or literally. Collapse. We see it in Royal Europe Habsburgs, with their massive jaws and infertility. In feudal Japan, where noble lines were protected so tightly they vanished in their own rituals. In isolated tribes, in cults, in ruling families who believed themselves chosen, Egypt simply wrote the story first. Its tombs record the longest-running tragedy of genetic self-destruction in human history. A cycle of sacred purity that became sacred suffering. And the most terrifying part? It wasn't inevitable. It was chosen, again and again. You return to the tomb. The torchlight flickers. Dust swirls around your breath. The golden face of the death mask stares back, not as a symbol of power, but as a silence. Behind that face lies not a god, but a broken boy. Behind the splendor lies a cry no one heard, but we hear it now. We've walked through 3,000 years of royalty and ruin. We've seen how empire can rise on myths and fall on biology. And we've even witnessed the cruel irony that the same blood that made a ruler divine could also make him die young, crippled, infertile, alone. This wasn't divine punishment, it was human failure. The pharaohs believed they were preserving the sacred. They preserved with suffering. And now, we are the inheritors of that lesson. Science has given us the language to understand what ancient medicine could not. Inbreeding increases the risk of recessive genes combining. Each generation amplifies the damaged neurological disorders, immune deficiencies, physical malformations. What the ancients called curses, or divine signs, we now call Mendelian inheritance, gene expression, mutation load. But the knowledge comes at a price. The price is knowing that this wasn't just a medical mistake. It was a moral one. The decision to marry siblings was not a necessity, was a belief. A belief that divine blood mattered more than human life. That the appearance of purity was worth more than the survival of children. That a throne built on pain could still be called sacred. And we must ask, do we still make these choices? Not in palaces, perhaps, but wherever power isolates itself, wherever ideologies place purity above compassion, wherever systems value lineage over life, there the story repeats. It repeats in the language of nationalism. In eugenics programs disguised as science, in communities where genetic diseases are ignored to preserve family honor, in policies that treat people as breeding stock instead of human beings. The tombs of Egypt are not just graves. They are warnings carved in limestone. Warnings that no amount of ritual or gold can shield you from biology. Warnings that divine myths cannot cure broken DNA. Warnings that the moment we stop questioning power, we start repeating its worst mistakes. So what should we remember? That strength is not in purity, but in diversity. That royalty is not measured by blood, but by wisdom. That no child deserves to suffer for the pride of their ancestors. And that if we listen closely, beneath the sand, beneath the stone, beneath the golden masks there, our voices whispering to us still, we were wrong. We thought we were gods, thought we were preserving something eternal. But we were just people, and we paid the price. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about history, genetics, or power, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. It amazes me that thousands of years later, we can stand together at the edge of a tomb and see not gods but humans. It's broken, flawed, magnificent in their fragility. If you want more stories like this, stories that unearth the hidden truths of the past, please like this video and subscribe. Because history has no meaning unless we carry its lessons forward.